Ladies, I don't like them because I'm gay. Otherwise, y'all are delightful. Well, except for these 16 ladies. they're pretty awful because they murdered people. This is another TikTok compilation video from my TikTok page. These are 16 videos where I told stories of women who killed. Oh yeah, women kill. It's true. Look at you, Casey Anthony. At any rate, as usual, these videos will be in TikTok format, so it'll be like all skinny and stuff. Not like me, I wish I was. So, if you don't like that format, you don't have to watch this video. It's okay. But if you don't mind, or you want to just turn my face over and plant me on the ground, that's also okay. Enjoy these cases where 16 women murdered someone. Viewer discretion is advised. Oh, I forgot to say, hello, true crimers. We're doing this backwards today, folks. Discretion advised, viewer. The interrogation of Stephanie Lazarus is by far one of the most bizarre things you will ever witness. Hello, true crimers. This is the case of Sherri Rasmussen. Viewer discretion is advised. In 1984, 27-year-old Sherri Rasmussen was a nursing director at a hospital in Glendale, California. Around that time, she met John Rutan, who was working in the manufacturing business. And by November of 1985, the two were married. Now, before John got together with Sherri, he had an on-again, off-again relationship with a woman named Stephanie Lazarus. Now, Stephanie was a little obsessive of John. She would, steal his clothes. She would take pictures of him while he was nude. Eventually, Stephanie would become a member of the LAPD. Just before John got married to Sherri, Stephanie managed to weasel her way in and get one last little badoo-badoo-badoom, you know what I mean? Bow-chicka-bow-wow. Something that John to this day obviously regrets. On the morning of February 24th, 1986, John would leave their apartment to go to work. Now, before he left, Sherri told him that she was planning to call off of work that day. She wasn't feeling good. And that's what she did. This was around 7-ish in the morning. By 9:45 a.m., a neighbor noticed that John and Sherri's garage door was open and Sherri's car was missing. The neighbor contacted John, and then John tried calling home, but no one answered. Several people tried calling the house, no one answered. When John got home later that day, he noticed there was glass around the garage, and then walking into the home, he saw the body of his wife, Sherri Rasmussen. The house was in disarray. It appeared there was a struggle inside, and it looked like it was a robbery that went wrong. Sherri had been shot 3 times. The coroner would say that any one of the shots, just one of them, would have killed her regardless. Now, she also had something on her arm, a very obvious bite mark. The coroner would swab the bite mark to get DNA. Now, this was suspected, again, just a robbery. There were composite drawings made of these 2 individuals who were allegedly seen in the area. Police briefly questioned Stephanie Lazarus as she was sort of like a jilted ex, but she would eventually be cleared. And then the case went cold. We're talking a couple of decades. Now, after a whole lot of investigating, a whole lot of back and forth, they would eventually test the DNA left on the bite mark. And it matched a woman. Now, I gotta wrap this up. Since Lazarus was a suspect back then, and now she's a detective that investigates art thefts at this point, police stalk her out. They managed to obtain some DNA without her knowledge. The DNA matched Crazy Eyes. Go to YouTube and type in JCS Stephanie Lazarus and watch this. But she was the killer, out of jealousy. She got 27 years to life. Buried underneath a pile of Christmas presents under the tree would be a gruesome discovery. Hello, true crimers. It is time for another Christmas murder story. Viewer discretion is advised. This was 67-year-old Michelle O'Dowd, and she lived in Jacksonville, Florida. Now, through some family members, she would meet a friend, 37-year-old Patty White. Now, Patty would go through some rough patches in her life. And her friend, Michelle, was always there to help her out. For example, when Patty needed a place to stay, Michelle would open up her door. Now, Patty normally lived in York, South Carolina. By December 5th, 2011, Michelle had her Christmas tree up. Excited for Christmas, she already had wrapped presents underneath the tree. Her friend Patty, at the same time, needed a place to stay. So again, like always, Michelle opened her door to her. Sadly, it would be for the last time. On an early December morning, 2011, Michelle's twin brother, whose name is Phil, he would go to Michelle's home just to check on her. He walked in the apartment and it looked like it had been completely ransacked. There were tables and chairs flipped over. There were drawers just left open. At first glance and after calling her name, he didn't see his sister. However, her car was in the parking lot and her dog was still there walking around the apartment. And then that is when he noticed a foot sticking out of a pile of presents underneath her tree. This is not her tree, by the way. He moved the presents around and he would uncover the body of his sister Michelle. She was ice cold to the touch and her face had a bloody towel covering it. The 67-year-old woman had been beaten to death. Her credit cards were stolen. Now, Michelle was so trusting of Patty that she actually gave her her PIN number, so she can go out and buy groceries and that kind of stuff for the apartment. Well, Patty would be caught using her debit card at an ATM. She would withdraw $1,000 from the account. Simply put, Michelle was killed for a little bit of money. What makes this story even worse is that neighbors in the apartment complex heard actual screams coming from Michelle's apartment the night she was murdered. But not one single person called 911. Not one. It could have possibly saved her life. Patty White was arrested in South Carolina. Patty would plead guilty to the murder, and in 2013 she was sentenced to 45 years in prison. And parole is not an option. She'll be somewhere in her 80s when she is released. This woman here may be one of the coldest murderers you've likely never heard of. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Angela Simpson. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. On August 2nd, 2009, in Phoenix, Arizona, 46-year-old Terry Neely would leave an assisted living facility in his motorized wheelchair. And for 3 days, he was missing. But on August 5th, 2009, police would be called to an area in Phoenix where there was a trash can on fire. When firefighters arrived and they put the fire out, inside the trash bin were the remains of Terry Neely. It didn't take police long to find out who did it. Angela Simpson just confessed to it while she was serving time for a robbery charge at the end of August 2009. And she was more than forthcoming. In fact, she was incredibly cold and callous. You can actually watch an interview of her on YouTube, and it's disturbing because she does not care at all about what she did to him. So her story is that on August 2nd, 2009, she lured Terry to her apartment in Phoenix. She said that Terry said he was a snitch. So she believed he was a snitch. About what? I'm not too sure. But it was enough for her to, I guess, take revenge on him. Over the course of about 3 days, she tortured Terry. She pulled out his teeth one by one. She beat him repeatedly with a tire iron. She drove a nail into his head. She impaled him with a large sharp instrument. She strangled him in and out of consciousness. And then she stabbed him over 50 times. And when he finally succumbed and he died, she then dismembered him and threw him in a garbage can, and then set it on fire. Girl, are you good? Jesus! She said Terry was a liar and the media was lying about him being in a motorized wheelchair because he could walk just fine. No, he needed a wheelchair. The two of them knew each other well enough. But yeah, this was a premeditated torture murder. And it's vile and disturbing and disgusting. Now, Cuckoo Cuckoo here was already serving time for the robbery in 2009, so it wasn't until March of this year, 2021, when she was finally convicted of murdering Terry, which she pleaded guilty to doing. Again, her interview is just like off the wall, cold as ice. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 14 extra years for good measure. Bye! Murderers come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and colors, and yeah, even in ages too. Pictured here behind me is Hope and Robert Schreiner. When the two of them met in New York, Robert, he already had 3 sons, and Hope, she already had 5 kids. So we almost have a sort of Brady Bunch scenario going on here. That's all pretty cool with me, no judgment. They got married sometime in the 60s, and then by the time this case starts, they had been married for 43 years. And it seemed like a picturesque, wonderful marriage on the outside. Now, when they both retired, they moved to the little city of Townsend, Vermont, and they were living in this house here. On the afternoon of June 2nd, 2004, Hope would make a panicked call to 911. She said her husband was bleeding. He was on the ground by the car, bleeding in the driveway. This is a recreation. When the authorities and the ambulance got there, 78-year-old Robert was pronounced dead at the scene. It was pretty evident to them that he had been beaten very severely. He had several blunt force trauma wounds to his head. Now, they also noticed that the blood around Robert had started to dry, and blood dries from the outside inward. So because of that, and also by analyzing Robert's body right there at the scene, they determined he had been dead for at least 3 hours already. At his autopsy, they would also discover that he had very high levels of Ambien in his system, and that was likely given to him sometime around 8 o'clock in the morning that day. Hope had started to tell authorities that Robert had become a hard man to know. He had become extremely impatient with her. She said that, he was always yelling at her. Now, a few years earlier, Robert was involved in a near-fatal car accident. This created a whole lot of health problems with him. He also had cancer at one point where one of his lungs was removed. He had a lot going on. But Hope would claim that he was physically abusive to her, but no one really ever corroborated that. Now, 71-year-old Hope, she muttered under her breath one time to a family member about Robert's death. She goes, "Oh, don't worry about it, I did it." Literally, she told a family member that. She then randomly told another friend, "I just snapped." Again, almost confessing to the murder. Well, police would also find out Hope was sleeping around. She was hooking up with a 77-year-old man, and he confirmed it was just for sex. Everybody does it, Mike. Everyone does it. She told him before Robert's death, "Would you be with me if Robert was no longer in the picture?" Wink. He's like, "No." Hope was arrested for the murder and went on trial in 2006. She was found guilty and was sentenced to 17 years to life. She can be paroled when she's 90. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Adrian Reynolds. Viewer discretion is advised. Adrian was born on September 12, 1988 in Kilgore, Texas. And then when she was about 16 years old, her and her adopted father moved to East Moline in Illinois. She would enroll at an outreach center in order to get her GED because she aspired to be in the military. And she worked at a Checkers restaurant part-time. Adrian also had a dream to design cars and possibly even be a singer. On January 21st, 2005, Adrian was expected to start her shift at Checkers at 5 p.m., but she was a no-show. That's something that's very unlike her. Her family hadn't seen her, and after they couldn't get a hold of her after a couple of hours, they reported her missing. Adrian had a very small group of friends since moving to East Moline. These friends included Sarah Kolb and Corey Gregory. On January 21st, 2005, Sarah had invited Adrian to go get lunch at Taco Bell, and this would be before Adrian's shift started at Checkers. And at some point during the drive, there was an altercation between Adrian and Sarah. And one thing, I guess, led to another, and Corey would pin Adrian down, and Sarah began to beat her with a wooden handle. and then she strangled her with a belt and killed her. It all happened in this vehicle. Now, the rumor is that Adrian had tried to ask out Corey, but Sarah didn't like that because Sarah was obsessed with Corey even though Sarah had a boyfriend. Sarah didn't want anyone to steal Corey. Sarah and Corey would then take Adrian's body to Sarah's grandparents' farm, where they attempted to set her on fire. It didn't work. So they loaded her back into the car, and they involved their 16-year-old friend Nathan Godet, and he helped them dismember Adrian. Why? Why would you do that? They then threw her dismembered body down this manhole. Sarah's body would still be discovered a couple of days later on January 24th. Jesus. The friends were brought in for questioning, and Corey just folded. He confessed. He ratted out Sarah, everything. Now, Nathan Godet was arrested and charged with helping dismember a body. He served 4 years in a juvenile center, and then he died in a car accident. Sarah was sentenced to 53 years to life, and Corey got 40 years. Teenage jealousy. Unbelievable. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Abby Hebert. Viewer discretion is advised. By the time of this story in 2015, Abby was a 17-year-old high school girl living in Ackworth, Georgia with her family. She was described as a really great student, and she was aspiring to become a nurse. Now, Abby was really close with one of her cousins, and actually it's a cousin by marriage, 18-year-old Olivia Nicole Smith. They hung out all the time, and some family members would even say that Olivia at times appeared to be kind of obsessive of Abby. Like, she would purposely dye her hair to look like her, possibly even jealousy over looks. But at the same time, they were just really, really close. On the morning of November 14th, 2015, at their home in Ackworth, Georgia, Olivia had actually spent the night over there because they had partied the night before. But in the morning, they went to Chick-fil-A, they got some breakfast, they went into a Kroger store, and then at some point, the two of them would smoke some marijuana. Teens being teens, you know. But something happened from this. A neighbor would get a knock on their door. It was Olivia. She said something happened. On the front lawn of the home, witnesses saw Olivia Smith on top of Abby, stabbing her to death. She had stabbed her multiple times across the chest and even tried to go for her face. Now, Olivia obviously stopped and went to go get help. When police arrived, they did discover the deceased body of Abby Hebert, and they also noticed a trail of blood going from the driveway into the house into the kitchen. Olivia gives the story that they were smoking pot, and all of a sudden, she was told by God that she had to kill Abby. And so she did just that. She began to attack her in the kitchen. Abby then ran out of the house screaming, but Olivia caught up and managed to keep stabbing her until she was dead. They don't know if there was anything laced in the marijuana. I mean, yeah, it's sort of a mind-altering drug, but I don't know. I guess I've never really heard stories of this kind of thing happening on pot. But Olivia swears it was this, drug-induced psychotic break. Abby's dad, understandably, had issues with her story. He kind of brought up the whole jealousy stuff and the obsessiveness. But the truth of the matter is we'll never truly know what actually happened. Olivia was charged with a slew of crimes, but eventually she would plead guilty to manslaughter, and she was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Was it the drugs? Did she just get really pissed? Unfortunately, who knows? Hello, true crimerers. This is the story of Conrad Roy. Viewer discretion is advised, and I also want to give you guys a trigger warning. This story is all about how someone took their own life, so please, if you have any reservations about stories like that, please do not watch this video. Now, most of my followers know that there are at least two people I despise more than anything on this earth, and that would be Casey Anthony and Jodi Arias. There is a third person, though, one who I despise more than anyone. Her name is Michelle Carter. And she is the most vile creature on this planet. 18-year-old Conrad had met Michelle Carter back in 2012, and they would begin dating even though they only saw each other about 5 times since they started dating. Conrad suffered from mental health issues, depression, Conrad had attempted to end his own life in 2012. He would say that his father would abuse him physically, his grandfather verbally abused him. Now, at the time, Michelle Carter had told him, please don't do that, let me get you help. If only she had kept that attitude, there is a chance we may not even be here talking about this today. You see, because if Conrad ended his own life, well, Michelle, she would get all the attention in the world. Conrad had said to her, we should do like a Romeo and Juliet thing. She wasn't so interested in that part, but the other half of it, she was. He had started talking about ending his own life again, and this time Michelle, well, no, it's probably the best time now because everyone is asleep. Just go somewhere in your truck and no one is out right now. You'll say you'll do it tomorrow, but you probably won't. Are you gonna do it today? Like in the daytime? Okay, I'm gonna do it today. Do you promise? I promise, babe, I have to now. Like right now? And you can't break a promise. Go to a quiet parking lot and do it. You just need to do it, Conrad. The more you push it off, the more it'll eat at you. All you have to do is turn on the generator, referring to a generator he would put into his truck for carbon monoxide purposes, and you'll be free and happy. When are you doing it? When are you going to do it? Stop ignoring the question. You can't think about it. You just have to do it. Like, I don't get why you aren't doing it. Do it early. Do it right now. Just do it. It wouldn't be suspicious and it won't take long. Yes, no more thinking. You just have to do it. No more waiting. Go ahead and pause and read some of this. Pause and read some of this. On July 13th, 2014, after being encouraged and pressured by Michelle Carter, Conrad Roy got into his truck and ended his own life by poisoning himself with carbon monoxide. She was talking to him on the phone as he was doing it. She said at one point he got out of the truck and she said, get back in there. She got convicted of manslaughter and got 15 months in prison. Fuck her. This case is as equally heartbreaking as it is gruesome. So, a fair warning. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Taylor Morton Parker. Viewer discretion is advised. Taylor was a 27-year-old living in DeKalb, Texas. In October of 2020, she was pulled over by a state trooper. She said she just had a baby, the baby isn't breathing, and the baby was in the car. So her and the baby were rushed to the nearest hospital where the baby, unfortunately, would be declared deceased. They would also quickly determine that Taylor did not give birth to that baby. Later that same day, October 9th, 2020, the mother of Reagan Hancock, who is pictured right there, she would enter the home to find her daughter was deceased. And Reagan was 7 months pregnant. And the baby was missing. And it was obvious that she did not give birth naturally. Reagan, who had 2 other children, she had been murdered and the baby was cut out of her crudely with a knife. That same day, 27-year-old Taylor would be arrested and she confessed to murdering Reagan. She confessed to cutting Reagan open, taking the baby out, and planned to kidnap the baby. You see, throughout 2020, Taylor was trying to convince people that she was pregnant. And she too had other children. But she told her boyfriend that, we're pregnant, and no one believed her. So she would post photos like this, and this, to convince people she was pregnant. But plenty of people thought and even knew she was lying. But she had to convince her boyfriend that she was pregnant, she wasn't lying. Well, she knew that her friend, Reagan, was pregnant. Now, Taylor had actually photographed her wedding about a year prior to this. They were casual friends. So Taylor came up with the insane idea of kidnapping her baby, who wasn't born yet. Reagan had recently posted sonogram pictures. She even went on Facebook and said, I feel like the baby is going to come early this time. And how excited she was to welcome the new baby into the world. Too bad she wouldn't get that opportunity. I don't know if I can think of anything more deplorable, disgusting, evil. Taylor Morton Parker was charged with 2 counts of capital murder, which means they are seeking the death penalty for her. Because of the COVID pandemic, her trial was delayed a lot. But a judge just recently set her trial for September of 2022. And I wish her the worst of luck. A young woman would open her apartment door covered in blood, put her hands behind her head, and tell police, "Arrest me. I killed her." Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Alexa Cannon. Viewer discretion is advised. Alexa was a 20-year-old psychology major at Radford University in Radford, Virginia. Her friends and family would remember her for her love of art and music. She would basically live on social media sites. While going to school, she would meet another 20-year-old student by the name of Louisa Cutting. Louisa was actually the president of the Latino Student Alliance at Radford University. The two would become fast friends, and at one point they were living across the hall from one another, and then eventually they moved into the same apartment. The two of them would live in an off-campus apartment, and by all accounts, everything was going great. They essentially were the very best of friends, sisters almost. On January 21st, 2019, somewhere around 7:45 in the morning, police were called because there was some screaming coming from their apartment. When police walked up to the door of the apartment, police said they heard a woman rambling about knives, and then they knocked on the door, and they were greeted by Louisa Cutting. She was drenched in blood, and the moment she saw the police officers, she calmly turned around, put her hands behind her head, and said, "Arrest me, I killed her." Police discovered the body of Alexa Cannon. She had been stabbed multiple times. Louisa had left the butcher knife that she used in Alexa's mouth. Louisa told the police officers that she had been doing cocaine with the devil. The night before the murder took place, she didn't just do cocaine. She was on mushrooms, Adderall, Xanax, marijuana, alcohol, and the cocaine. When brought to the police station, she was rambling like a mad person. They described it as her going through a bizarre series of episodes. She tried telling the officers about the apocalypse. She kept reciting the Hail Mary in Spanish. She also was seen trying to shove her entire fist down her throat. She was immediately put into a mental health institution for about a week or two. Her lawyers would claim that she had a mental illness, and of course all of the drugs would create the psychotic episode that led to the murder. Louisa never denied it. She admitted what she did, and she ended up taking a plea bargain, where she demonstrated remorse and regret, and again acknowledged what she did. She was given a 40-year sentence. The second 20 years would be suspended, where she would be on constant watch. She will be imprisoned until 2039. This image appears to be a sweet, loving woman just praying to God. Looks can be deceiving because this woman was executed by lethal injection in 1998. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Carla Faye Tucker. Viewer discretion is advised. Now, Carla was born in 1959 in Houston, Texas. Yes, Texas. Her mother, who raised her on her own, she liked to bounce around the country a lot, doing drugs and other not-so-legal things. So, by 12 years old, Carla, she had begun to prostitute herself. A couple of years after that, she fell into the world of drugs and alcohol, and honestly, she never really looked back. Carla would eventually become friends with a group of bikers who, again, they all did drugs together and had a good old time. In that group, she met a man by the name of Jerry Lynn Dean, and he would introduce Carla to her next boyfriend, Daniel Garrett. Daniel and Carla, oh, what a sweet picture this is. They quickly began dating. Carla had a very tumultuous kind of friendship with Jerry Dean. They were constantly arguing with each other, and at one point, Jerry took his motorcycle and just wheeled it right into her living room, creating just a horrible mess. There was one instance where Karla punched Jerry Dean right in the face. On June 13th, 1983, Time Magazine's Couple of the Year decided to do a whole bunch of drugs. Like, they were mixing speed and cocaine, heroin, and they were also getting drunk. So Karla said, hey, let's go break into Jerry's apartment and steal his motorcycle. So the two of them, along with their friend Jerry Liebrandt, would break into the apartment. They broke in the middle of the night, again still high out of their minds, and at one point, because they were so loud, they woke Jerry up. Daniel grabbed a hammer that he found on the floor and he began hitting Jerry with it. But he didn't die from that. Karla found a pickaxe, and she thrust it into Jerry many times until he was dead. And then, there was someone in the bed with Jerry, Deborah Thornton. They weren't expecting her to be there. They did not even know who she was. She woke up in the middle of the attack and she backed away into the wall. And then Karla took the pickaxe and began striking her over the head until she was dead. Karla reportedly was smiling ear to ear while doing it. It didn't take long for authorities to find out who did it, so these two were arrested and charged with both murders. While awaiting trial, she converted to Christianity, and this took the news by storm. But she would go to trial. For some reason, prosecutors then dropped the charges against her for Deborah's murder, so she was then convicted of the murder of Jerry Dean, and she was sentenced to death. Her newfound religious ways were convincing people that she should not be executed for some reason. Listen, I'm not too big on the death penalty, but she still committed 2 brutal murders. Her conversion to Christianity afterwards shouldn't have any effect on what her sentence was, because then anyone could do that. Now, Daniel was also sentenced to death, but he died in 1993 of natural causes. James, from what I can tell, took a plea deal, and he only served less than 10 years, I think. Despite many appeals in court and pleas for clemency from the world abroad, Carla Faye Tucker was executed in 1998 by lethal injection. She was the first woman executed in Texas since 1863. This is the case of Beulah May Annan, and it may sound a little familiar. Beulah. No, not that. Beulah was born on November 18th, 1899, in Owensboro, Kentucky. Beulah would go on to marry a man named Perry Stevens while living in Kentucky, but then they divorced. Soon after that divorce, she met a car mechanic named Albert Annan. Then, the two of them moved to Chicago, where they got married on March 29th, 1920. That's my birthday. Exactly, that's how old I am. Well, I guess Albert wasn't keeping Beulah's satisfied, because then she began sleeping around with a guy named Harry Kulstedt. Then, on April 3rd, 1924, Beulah and Harry were getting a little tipsy and also fooling around a bit. Gross. But then a fight broke out. They started yelling at each other. And there was a gun on the bed. And they both reached for the gun. You see what I did there? But Beulah, she got the gun first, and she shot Harry. Then she says she sat on the bed, drank a little bit more booze, and just watched Harry slowly die. I just imagined her like... Then she called her husband and said, "Now see here, dearie, I shot a man in the face. He was trying to sexually assault me." First she said she shot the man in self-defense. Because, the gun. Then this crazy see you next Tuesday, she changed her story again. She said that Harry was threatening to leave her. And she went, "Oh no, dearie, you're gonna leave me, see?" And then she shot him. Then she would say she told Harry she was pregnant, which is when he flipped out, they struggled, saw the gun on the bed, reached for... Mr. Annan stood by her. He paid for the fanciest lawyers. Her case went to trial, and she was acquitted. Shortly after the trial, the couple divorced. 'Cause you can look right through me, walk right by me, and never know I'm there. Okay, I'll stop. If you haven't caught on yet, Beulah is the real-life inspiration for the character Roxy Hart from the musical Chicago. One of my favorites. Roxy Hart. Yeah. Anyway, the couple divorced, and she would die of tuberculosis at age 28. Oh, the tuberculosis got her. May she rest in peace. She has more of a Maggie Gyllenhaal look to her. Anyway, that's her story. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Tracy Bagwell. Viewer discretion is advised. Tracy was a 36-year-old single mother living in Rockledge, Florida. Everyone who knew her had nothing but wonderful things to say about her. She was someone who cared deeply, not just about her own family, but about the people outside of her own family. Strangers like you and I. She was actually a caseworker for the Department of Children and Families in Florida. She was just known as a person, a caseworker who would drop anything, and at any time, to help an individual on one of her cases. At about 10 p.m. on June 5th, 2001, her pager would go off. It was a page from someone at work. The page from work would bring her to the First Baptist Church, and this was in Merritt Island, Florida. At approximately 4:30 p.m. the following day, Tracy Bagwell's vehicle would be discovered, and this was in the parking lot of the church. And inside the vehicle was the dead body of Tracy Bagwell. She had been stabbed about 30 times, primarily in her face, her neck, and some in her chest. There was blood drops outside of the car. The only thing that appeared to be missing, oddly, was her pager. Investigators would quickly zero in on a suspect, someone Tracy knew well, her 50-year-old co-worker, Candace Fiore. You see, Candace was doing some shady stuff at work. She was an embezzler. She embezzled over $100,000 in cash, in toys, in electronics. She forged signatures of her boss and also of Tracy Bagwell on some of her requisition forms. Tracy caught on pretty quick because whoever filled out the form spelled her name wrong. The speculation is that Tracy figured out that it was Candace Fiore stealing a whole bunch of stuff. So Candace, well, she couldn't have anyone finding out. Police were sort of tailing Candace for a bit. They wanted to try something out. Since the pager was missing, the police would begin to page Tracy Bagwell's pager. So as they were tailing Candace, they noticed she stopped at a convenience store. They walked up to her car, paged the pager again, and lo and behold, Tracy Bagwell's pager was going off in the vehicle of Candace Fiore. Candace was a well-loved person, a sweetheart to most people. Police would question her, and then they would release her. The investigation was just starting, and then within 48 hours of her essentially virtually being caught, she would be found dead on her property. She jumped off the roof and into her pool. Guilty conscience? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Jack Raines. Viewer discretion is advised. General Jack Raines, as he was known, lived a very fulfilled life. He served in the U.S. Air Force for 32 years. He fought in, actual wars. He was a Tennessee highway patrolman for many, many years, and then he was even the chief of police. He was a father and a grandfather. He also had a wife around his age, and by the time this story takes place, she was actually suffering from dementia. So she was actually living in a nursing home. He was living in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, living a very simple, very humble, very quiet life, just wanting to live out the rest of his years in peace. But he still liked to have fun from time to time. He liked to go to gun shows, gun stores, and it was through going to those where he met a new friend. He would meet a man by the name of Ronald Williamson, and he had a wife of his own, and her name was Tina Williamson. Jack became very good friends with the Williamson family very quickly, and it even got to a point where Jack would actually drive Tina around because she was not able to drive due to a back injury she had. So he would take her to where she needed to go to get medication, the grocery store, etc. Jack was a very kind-hearted person and would just do anything for anyone. On the afternoon of September 1st, 2007, Jack was discovered in his home, shot dead. Ron and Tina had not heard from him in a couple days, so they went to go check on him, and that is what they discovered. Jack was shot 5 times. And it appeared that he was shot from behind because he was just sitting at his kitchen table. You can tell that he was like reading a newspaper. He even had like a coffee cup next to his hand. So this was a very surprise attack. The house appeared to have been rummaged through, even though nothing was stolen. There were valuables left around. There were like watches. There was cash. It appeared that someone tried to stage this to look like a robbery. Police then found out about speculation that Jack Raines may have been having an affair with Tina Williamson. Tina, of course, denied it, but when they tested some of the clothing items, specifically his boxers, they noticed his DNA was on it, as well as female DNA. They also uncovered a joint account between Jack Raines and Tina Williamson that would pay her $100,000 should he no longer be around. Shortly after his death, sure enough, she tried to get that money out. But thankfully, because of the investigation, they had already put that money in a freeze. Tina would deny, but a friend of hers, Betty, she told police that, yeah, I actually picked up Tina from near Jack's house that day. So she was arrested and charged with his murder, and she would be sentenced to 71 years in prison. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Sylvia Likens. I just watched Chills on YouTube. Now my voice is stuck like this. Viewer discretion is advised. Sylvia Likens was born on January 3rd, 1949 in Indianapolis, Indiana. She was one of 5 children to 2 parents who were carnival workers. In 1965, her mother was arrested for shoplifting, and her father needed to continue doing the carnival work. So he asked the mother of 2 girls that Sylvia was friends with if she could board with her for $20 a week, and Gertrude Banazeweski, this woman, said yes. So in June of 1965, Sylvia and her sister Jenny moved in with the Banazeweski family. Gertrude had 7 children of her own. For the first few weeks of staying with the family, the girls were having a great time. They got along with everyone. They were not really punished for anything. But then the $20 a week that the father had agreed to pay Gertrude, well, that stopped coming in. Gertrude didn't like that. So Gertrude would begin to punish Sylvia and Jenny, initially just by beating them with a paddle on the rear end. Eventually, the abuse would be targeted directly towards Sylvia and not Jenny. Gertrude would beat Sylvia often. She would also starve her. She would force her to eat food out of the garbage. She would eventually start calling Sylvia fat. And Gertrude's daughter, Paula, pictured here, well, she was 3 months pregnant and a little chubby. So, being jealous of Sylvia's appearance, she began torturing Sylvia as well. She would beat her. One time they forced Sylvia to eat a hot dog with like every condiment on it, which made her throw up. They then forced her to eat her own vomit. So Sylvia retaliated by telling people at school that Paula and her sister Stephanie were prostitutes. And then Paula came home and beat the crap out of her. Stephanie's 15-year-old boyfriend, Coy Hubbard, he heard the rumor too, and so he joined in on the torture. He threw her into a wall, he smacked her, he kicked her. They punched Sylvia in the genitals. When Gertrude found out, she continued the beating of Sylvia. And then it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. Eventually, Paula's son, John, and then a neighborhood boy with the name of Richard Hobbs, they would torture and mutilate Sylvia's body. They would burn her skin, use her for judo practice, forced her to drink her own urine and eat her own feces. More often than not, she was forced to live in this cold basement. They tied her to the stairs, where they would force Sylvia to put Coke bottles up her you-know-what, even if the glass bottle was broken. They put cigarettes out on her. They forced her to urinate and defecate on her own self and not let her go to the bathroom. They shoved used diapers down her throat. They carved the words, "I am a prostitute and proud of it," on her stomach. Sylvia had become delirious, malnutritioned, and she would succumb to all of it on October 26th, and she died. Jenny was too afraid to ever say anything. Gertrude and these 4 were arrested. Gertrude and Paula got life sentences. The 3 boys were found guilty of manslaughter and got 2 to 21 years. Hello, true crimers. This is the case of Betty Gore. Aw, cute dog. This case is also known as the Friday the 13th axe murder. Betty was married to Alan Gore. Alan worked in the telecommunications industry, and Betty was a school teacher. But after the birth of their first child, Betty would never go back to work. After several visits with her doctor after the baby was born and some depression that kept building and building, her doctor would say she most likely had postpartum depression. And it only got worse after the birth of their second child. And the relationship between Betty and Alan has basically drifted completely apart. This is Candy Montgomery. She was a neighbor to the Gores. Candy was married to Texas Instruments employee Pat Montgomery. She was never really happy with their marriage. In fact, she was always indifferent towards Pat in general. But they married and had 2 kids together. On a hot, sweaty summer afternoon, Candy Montgomery was at a volleyball game sponsored by their church, and Alan was also there. Alan Gore. Their children were already friends. And since she was bored in her marriage, she said, "You know what? I think I want to fuck around." She blatantly asked Alan, "Hey, you wanna bang?" And Alan over here was a little taken aback, but he was like, "Yeah, sure, okay." So, Alan and Candy Montgomery, they started porking each other. Candy wanted to make sure this is just sex. This has nothing to do with love, nothing to do with anything, no emotions. And this affair lasted months, until Candy got bored of that too, and she called it off. On Friday, June 13th, 1980, Candy Montgomery stopped by the Gore home to ask for permission for the Gore's children to spend the night at their house. And this is when Candy said Betty approached her about the affair. Oh, she knew, apparently. Candy denied it. But then Betty found some love cards and notes that she showed to prove it. Alan was away on a business trip. Later that day, he tried to call Betty at home when he was in his hotel, but no one answered. He called Candy and she said, "Oh yeah, sure, I saw her earlier this morning." So Alan had other neighbors go check on Betty. And when the neighbors entered the home, they found the bloody, bludgeoned dead body of Betty Gore. Her face was barely recognizable. When police got there to investigate, they realized the killer had taken a shower in the Gore's home. And they found a rubber sandal footprint near the body. This is when Alan confessed that he had an affair with Candy Montgomery. Then Candy Montgomery got herself an attorney. Well, that's awkward timing for that. Candy was arrested for the murder of Betty Gore. At her trial, Candy said that Betty attacked her first, after confronting her about the affair. Then Candy said she got the axe and was able to hit Betty 41 times. So Candy claimed self-defense, and the jury bought it. She was acquitted. Acquitted! This is the case of the Lululemon murder. Lululemon was established in 1998, and it was a popular athletic wear type store. Well, unfortunately for them, Lululemon would become famous for something else. On March 11th, 2011, a manager for the store would come in to see the store in a complete disarray. It looks like some sort of altercation took place. In the back of the store, they found the body of Jana Murray and the still living Brittany Norwood. Brittany was taken to the hospital right away, of course. She would say that 2 men entered the building after her and Jana had to come back into the building after closing to get a wallet that was left behind. She said the 2 men tied both women up and sexually assaulted both of them and then tortured Jana and killed her. She claimed they left her alive because she was the best one to have, intercourse with. Well, turns out it was a crock of shit. 2 men never entered the building. Police saw right through her lies. You see, Brittany had a history of stealing things from coworkers, from the store itself. She had a history going all the way back to high school, stealing things from lockers. But working in retail, it can be very, very difficult to fire someone for theft when you don't have proof of it. Well, on the night of March 11, 2011, Jana caught her red-handed stealing a pair of yoga pants. And I guess Brittany just couldn't have that. The worst part here is Jana wasn't even supposed to be working that night. She was actually covering for another manager. Okay, so I'm graying this image out so it's not showing what it's the actual color, but still I want to give you a trigger warning because I'm about to show a potentially graphic image. So this is what the room looked like, and you can just guess what that is on the floor and the walls in the back. You see, Brittany had taken Jana to the back and inflicted 331 different wounds on her body, using an assortment of all of these tools, all because she got caught stealing a pair of yoga pants. Probably wouldn't fit your fat ass anyway, I'm just saying. But guess what? Turns out Jana already told everyone that she caught her stealing. So this whole murder to cover up this theft of yoga pants, well, it was all for naught. You crazy ass psycho bitch. After she tortured Jana, she tied herself up to make it look like she was held captive and waited next to the dead body of her coworker until the manager came in the morning to discover them. That's called being a psychopath. Well, of course, Brittany was arrested and her trial lasted only 6 days. She was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was an Apple store next to this Lululemon location. The judge in this case took a look at the security footage from inside the Apple store, and they could actually see employees listening against the wall when they're hearing someone scream for their life and doing nothing about it. And now they have to live with that.